Year 10 and 11, welcome to your Frankenstein summary and analysis in preparation for your AQA English Literature exam. A basic summary. The novel begins with Captain Robert Walton on a journey. He discovers Victor Frankenstein in a weak and crippled state and takes him on board his ship. Victor Frankenstein begins to tell his story. At this point in the novel, the narrator changes from Robert Walton to Victor Frankenstein. We hear about Victor Frankenstein's childhood. We learn that Elizabeth entered their family at a young age. We learn that Victor's mother is keen on the idea of Victor marrying Elizabeth in the future. We also hear that Victor is interested in natural philosophy. One day, Victor witnesses lightning striking a tree and destroying it. This makes him fascinated with science, and when he goes to university, he becomes obsessed. Victor's obsession with science leads him to collect body parts from charnel houses and graveyards. He then puts together the monster, Frankenstein, and brings it to life. Arguably the most important chapter, the most famous chapter, it's chapter 5 when the monster comes to life. However, when the monster does come to life, Victor is disgusted and horrified at what he has created and runs away, leaving the monster by himself. After everything that happens with the monster, Victor falls ill. Elizabeth writes to him, expressing her concern about his health and his illness. She also tells him that Justine Moritz, a girl who used to live with the Frankenstein family, has returned to their house following her mother's death. Following that, Victor receives another letter from his father, telling him his brother William has been murdered. Upon hearing this news, Victor rushes home. When he returns home, Victor learns that Justine has been accused of the murder. After the discovery of the body, a servant had found in Justine's pocket a picture of Caroline Frankenstein, last seen in William's possession. Victor proclaims that Justine is innocent, but there is obvious evidence against her. Victor knows or suspects that it is the monster. However, he refuses to explain himself for fear that people will label him insane. Justine confesses to the crime, believing that she will be saved from execution. Unfortunately, Justine is executed for the murder of William. After the execution, Victor becomes increasingly melancholy. He considers suicide, but restrains himself by thinking of Elizabeth and his father. Victor decides to travel to the summit of Montanvert, hoping that the view of pure, eternal, beautiful nature will revive his spirits. When he reaches the glacier at the top, he is momentarily consoled by the spectacle that he sees. However, as he crosses to the opposite side of the glacier, he spots a creature travelling towards him at incredible speed. At closer range, he recognised the grotesque shape of the monster. He begins to threaten the monster, whose enormous strength and speed allow him to elude Victor easily. Victor curses him and tells him to go away, but the monster can speak eloquently and persuades him to accompany him to a fire in a cave of ice. Inside the cave, the monster begins to narrate the events of his life. Chapter 11 is now narrated by the monster Frankenstein. Sitting by the fire in his hut, the monster tells Victor of the confusion he experienced upon being created. He describes his flight from Victor's apartment into the wilderness and his discovery of light, darkness, hunger, thirst, and the cold. One day he finds a fire and is pleased at the warmth it creates, but he is dismayed when he burns himself on it. He realises that he can keep the fire alive by adding wood, and that the fire is good not only for heat and warmth, but for also making food. When searching for food, the monster finds a hut and enters it. His presence causes an old man inside the hut to shriek and run away in fear. The monster then heads to a village where more people flee at the sight of him. As a result of these incidents, he resolves to stay away from humans, and he takes refuge in a small hovel adjacent to a cottage. He discovers that he can see into the cottage through a crack in the wall and begins to observe the occupants, a young man, a young woman, and an old man. Frankenstein observes his neighbours for an extended period of time. He notices that they are unhappy. He eventually realises that they are unhappy because they are poor. He has been stealing food from the family, and then when he realises that they are poor, he stops. He also begins to help the family with chores by collecting wood at night and leaving it at the cottage door for the family's use. The monster realises that the neighbours can communicate by using strange sounds, and he vows to learn language. He first tries to match the sounds that they make and the actions that they perform. He can understand a few basic words to begin with. However, when Frankenstein sees his own reflection in a pool, he is disgusted at his ugliness. He then spends the whole winter isolated in his hovel and well protected from the elements, and he grows increasingly affectionate towards the family he watches in the cottage. One day, a beautiful woman in a dark dress and veil arrives at the cottage. Felix becomes ecstatic the moment he sees her. The woman, who is named Safie, does not speak the language of the cottagers. When she moves into the cottage, she learns the language, and when she learns the language, so does the monster. He also learns to read. He also learns about world history. Now that he is able to speak and understand language, he learns about humans, society, family, and relationships. He then understands that he is deformed and alone. Upon learning about family and relationships, the monster becomes more melancholy and more distressed at his own isolation. While foraging in the forest one day, the monster finds a leather satchel containing clothes and books. Eager to learn more about the world, he brings the books back to his hovel and begins to read. The books include Johann Wolfgang van Gogh's Sorrows of Werther, a volume of Plutarch's Lives, sorry if I pronounced these incorrectly, and John Milton's Paradise Lost. The last of which, Paradise Lost, has a profound effect on the monster. Unaware that Paradise Lost is a work of imagination, he believes it is factual history and compares the similarities between this story and his own. I shall go into more detail about Paradise Lost at the end of this summary. When rifling through the pockets of his own clothes stolen from Victor's apartment, he finds papers from Victor's journal which describe how he was created, and he understands the horrific manner of his creation and the disgust with which Victor feels regarding him. The monster wishes to reveal himself to the cottagers in the hope that they will see past his hideous exterior. He decides to approach De Lacy first because he is blind, hoping to win him over. The monster nervously enters the cottage and begins to speak to the old man. But just as he is explaining his situation, the other three return. Felix drives the monster away as he is horrified by his appearance. The monster swears revenge against all human beings. He decides to journey towards Geneva. On the way, he spots a young girl, seemingly alone, fall into a stream and appears to be drowning. When the monster rescues the girl from the water, the man accompanying her suspects him of attacking her and shoots him. As he gets closer to Geneva, he comes across William in the woods. When William mentions his father is Alphonse Frankenstein, the monster erupts in a rage of vengeance and strangles the boy to death with his bare hands. He takes the picture of Caroline Frankenstein that the boy was holding and places it into the dress of Justine Moritz, who is asleep in the barn. When he has explained his story to Victor, he begs Victor to create a monster to accompany him and to be his mate. Initially, Victor puts off the idea of creating a female creature. However, he realises that his marriage to Elizabeth is his only source of happiness. Alphonse suggests that they celebrate their marriage immediately. Victor refuses, unwilling to marry Elizabeth until he has completed his obligation to the monster and created a mate. Victor travels to England in order to complete the creation. Whilst creating the female creature, Victor has many concerns. When he looks up to see the grinning Frankenstein at his window, he is overcome by the monster's hideousness and the possibility of a second creature like him worries Victor. Therefore, he destroys his work. The monster becomes enraged at Victor for breaking his promise and at the prospect of his own seclusion. He vows revenge, swearing that he will be with Victor on his wedding night. Victor rows out into the ocean and throws away the remains of the female creature. When he reaches the shore of a nearby town, he meets a group of townspeople who are very rude to him, telling him that he is under suspicion for a murder discovered the previous night. Victor hears witnesses testify against him, claiming that they found the body of a man along the beach the previous night, and that just before finding the body, they saw a boat in the water that resembled Victor's. They decide to take Victor to the body to see what effect it has on him, to see if he is the murderer. Victor reacts when he sees the body. He reacts with horror because the body is that of his friend, Henry Clerval. Henry Clerval has black marks, the marks of the monster's hands, around his neck. In total shock, Victor falls into convulsions and suffers a long illness. Victor is found innocent of the murder and travels home with his father. He begins to worry about the monster's threat that he will be with him on his wedding night. Victor believes that the monster intends to attack him. Victor tells Elizabeth that he has a secret, but he can only tell her once they are married. The wedding day approaches and the wedding takes place, and Victor and Elizabeth depart for a family cottage to spend the night. That evening, Victor worries that Elizabeth might be upset by the monster's appearance. He tells her she should retire for the night. He begins to search for the monster in the house, when suddenly he hears Elizabeth scream and realises that it was never his death that the monster had been intending that night. It was the death of Elizabeth. Consumed with grief over Elizabeth's death, Victor returns home and tells his father the awful news. Shocked by the tragic end of what should have been a joyous day, his father dies a few days later. Victor finally breaks his secrecy and tries to convince a magistrate in Geneva that an unnatural monster is responsible for the death of Elizabeth. But the magistrate does not believe him. Victor resolves to devote the rest of his life to finding and destroying the monster. With his whole family destroyed, Victor leaves Geneva. He tracks the monster for months and follows him into the ice and snow of the north. This is where he meets Walton. He begs Walton to continue his search for vengeance after he is dead. The narrator changes once again to that of Walton. Walton writes to his sister and he tells her that he believes Victor's story. Victor once again begs the crew to hunt down the monster. However, they are reluctant. Just before the ship is set to head back to England, Victor dies. Several days later, Walton hears a strange sound coming from the room in which Victor's body lies. When he investigates the noise, Walton is startled to find the monster, as hideous as Victor had described, weeping over Victor's body. The monster begins to tell him of all of his sufferings. He says that he deeply regrets having become an instrument of evil, and that, with his creator dead, he is ready to die. He leaves the ship and departs into the darkness. Frankenstein is subtitled The Modern Prometheus. In Greek mythology, Prometheus made man from clay. He made the mistake of stealing fire from the gods in order to help man survive. Zeus punished Prometheus in a ridiculous manner. He was chained to a rock and a bird ate his liver every day. Every night his liver healed, and again the next day the bird would eat him. So what you need to do is think of the comparisons to Frankenstein. Victor is much like Prometheus. He tries to create mankind, and he is punished. Not in the same way that Prometheus is punished, but he is still punished. The deaths of those he loves. As part of the AQA English Literature exam, you may be asked about theme. The main themes are knowledge and how the pursuit of knowledge is dangerous. The pursuit of knowledge is at the heart of Frankenstein. Victor attempts to surge beyond accepted human limits and access the secret of life. Likewise, Robert Walton attempts to surpass previous human explorations by reaching the North Pole. The ruthless pursuit of knowledge proves dangerous, as Victor's acts of creation eventually result in the destruction of everyone dear to him. And Walton finds himself trapped between sheets of ice. Whereas Victor's obsessive hatred of the monster drives him to his death, Walton ultimately pulls back from his treacherous mission, having learned from Victor's example how destructive the thirst for knowledge can be. Nature is also a huge theme in Mary Shelley's novel. As you'll notice, she describes setting in extreme detail. I would look carefully at her descriptions as well, because they will help you in the creative writing section of English language, because her use of the semicolon, her vocabulary, her similes, metaphors are fantastic. Nature. Obviously, the natural world is used quite a lot. When Victor is depressed, he goes off to the mountain to lift his spirits and to change his mood. And likewise, after a hellish winter of cold and abandonment, the monster feels his heart lighten when the spring arrives. The influence of nature on mood is evident throughout the novel. But for Victor, the natural world's power to console him wanes when he realises that the monster will haunt him, no matter where he goes. By the end, as Victor chases the monster obsessively, nature, in the form of the Arctic desert, functions simply as the backdrop for his primal struggle against the monster. Okay? Again, what we want to be thinking about there is pathetic fallacy in terms of how her description of setting and weather is also a reflection of characters' feelings and characters' mood. Again, we could be using that on the creative writing paper in English language. Okay, our next theme is monstrosity. Don't forget to pause this video and make notes and things like that if I am talking too fast. Obviously, this is a clear theme. The monster is at the centre of all the action. 8 feet tall and hideously ugly, the monster is rejected by society. However, this monstrosity results not only from his grotesque appearance, but also from the unnatural manner of his creation, which involves the secretive animation of a mixture of stolen body parts and chemicals. The monster is only the most literal of a number of monstrous entities in the novel, including the knowledge that Victor used to create him. Obviously, we can argue that Victor himself is a kind of monster because his ambition, secrecy and selfishness alienated him from human society. Actually, if we look closer, he could be the true monster inside this novel. He is consumed by hatred. Okay. Secrecy. All right. Obviously, Victor is obsessed with science, and he's desperate to find out its secrets. And once he discovers the secrets of science, he is obsessed. He goes to see Kremp at the university, the natural philosopher. He becomes obsessed with creating life. And obviously he does this in a secretive manner, hence, not telling people about the monster when Justine is arrested for the murder of William. And then he is obsessed with destroying the monster. And obviously he has to keep that a secret as well, because he doesn't want people to think he's nuts. He continues his secrecy out of shame and guilt. The monster is forced into seclusion because of his appearance. Walton serves as the final confessor for both, and their tragic relationship becomes immortalised in his letters. In confessing all just before he dies, Victor escapes the stifling secrecy that ruins his life. Likewise, the monster takes advantage of Walton's presence to forge a human connection, hoping desperately that at last someone will understand and sympathise with him. Okay, the link to Paradise Lost, which is the book the monster reads and thinks is real. Okay, so listen closely. Again, stop as you need to. I'll go as slow as I can without obviously boring people. Okay, Victor Frankenstein, trying to play God and create human life, resembles Satan from John Milton's Paradise Lost. In this book, Satan is an archangel or an archangel, however you pronounce it. And he is punished for his vanity, his arrogance, and his thirst for forbidden knowledge. Okay? Like him, Victor attempts to take over God's role as creator and master of the universe. This achievement, Victor believes, will be a superior one. and the exuberant and admirable beings that he creates will worship and honour him. Okay? Many critics, especially William Blake, Lord Byron and Percy Shelley, interpreted Milton's story as a celebration of Satan, the rebellious hero who defies the power of God. They regarded Satan not as the embodiment of evil, but as a victim of the tyrannical power of the establishment. Okay? So, like Milton's Satan, Victor Frankenstein is a rebellious character who has faith in his own creative powers and has the courage to aspire higher than his limited human condition allows. However, Mary Shelley does not present Victor as admirable. His intellectual curiosity and his ambition does not contribute to any scientific advancement or progress. Instead, he destroys a family. If we go further, Frankenstein attempts to play God, just as the monster does in punishing Frankenstein. Then again, the monster expelled from human society is like Satan, falling from light into darkness. The fallen angel becomes a devil. The circumstances of the monster and Frankenstein echo many other aspects of the book, being expelled or refused access to paradise, having or not having a partner, having or not having the chance of redemption.